Welcome all to Whispers in the Dark, where shadows breathe and forgotten voices stir. Step beyond the veil and lose yourself in a realm where reality fractures and nightmares whisper lullabies. Here we conjure true psychological thrillers, haunted tales, and horror stories that burrow deep beneath your skin and nestle in the quiet corners of your mind. Each story crackles like old film reels, unspooling secrets too heavy for daylight. Whether it's the slow unraveling of a fractured psyche or the cold caress of something unseen lurking just behind you, we promise narratives that will haunt you long after the final word is spoken. So get ready, dim the lights, slip on your headphones and listen closely for the whispers in the dark, and subscribe if you dare to return.
We thought camping would be nothing more than beer under the stars and stupid stories by the fire, but by the second night, something about the forest felt wrong, and I swear to fucking God it wasn't just paranoia, because even the air carried a sour tang like spoiled meat, like something had died out there and hadn't been buried deep enough. The firelight kept flickering like it was struggling to hold itself against the dark, and every time the flames dipped low, I caught a glimpse of the trees leaning in closer, as if the woods were breathing heavy around us. One of my friends, Kyle, had laughed earlier in the day about old native legends warning of a creature that prowled when men grew greedy, but he was already drunk and slurring, and none of us gave a shit then. But when night fell, and the wind carried this shrill, almost human cry that echoed far too long to belong to anything natural, we all sat rigid and exchanged glances like children caught stealing. Mark tried to play it off with bravado until the sound came again, and it wasn't distant anymore. It was close, fucking close, right behind the veil of the tree line. And I swear, the whisper of branches moving carried words, though I couldn't decipher them. My pulse was hammering in my throat, and every nerve was screaming at me to grab my pack and bolt. But no one wanted to be the first coward, so we sat frozen until the smell hit us. That rancid iron rot like wet fur caked in blood and decomposition. And then there was movement, a shadow taller than any man shifting between the pines, its outline too thin, too jagged, limbs bent in ways bones shouldn't allow, and the firelight showed the gleam of eyes reflecting, not like an animal, but like glass catching headlights. Tom suddenly went pale and started swearing under his breath, and I remember the sound of his jeans ripping because he literally shit himself right there, and none of us even laughed. It wasn't funny, not when that sound came again, but clearer this time. A grotesque mimicry of our own voices, like something learning how to speak by imitating us badly, hearing my own laugh crawl out from the dark. But warped and stretched made my stomach clench so hard I thought I'd vomit. I whispered for us to stay quiet, but Kyle panicked and grabbed a flashlight, shining it into the brush, and for a fraction of a second, the beam caught it, a face that wasn't a face, skin stretched tight and translucent over a skull far too sharp, teeth long and yellow like splintered glass, and lips torn, ragged as if the thing had gnawed them off itself, its body impossibly tall but emaciated to the point of bones protruding like weapons, its arms elongated and clawed, its ribcage heaving as if the creature was starving, yet grinning with anticipation. Our terror must have fed it, because it stepped forward with this grotesque lurch, and the fire sputtered like it was suffocating under its presence. Mark screamed at us to run, and we did, tearing through the underbrush like hunted animals, branches clawing at our faces as though the forest itself wanted to keep us from escaping, and behind us came the sound of snapping limbs and that sickening voice calling our names in alternating pitches, low 1 second, shrill the next, as though dozens of throats were all trying to speak through one mouth. I could hear Kyle gasping behind me, his breath shallow, his flashlight beam swinging wildly before it cut off with a crunch that silenced him, and the forest swallowed his scream like it had been waiting. I didn't dare look back, but the noises followed, wet, dragging sounds, and that awful stench thickening until my throat burned, and I wanted to claw the air from my lungs. Tom was sobbing, and Mark was yelling for him to keep moving, but Tom stumbled and went down hard, his cries cut short by something wet snapping, and I swear the sound of chewing followed like meat being torn apart. Mark grabbed my arm and we didn't speak. We couldn't. Our words would have been devoured by the forest anyway, so we just ran until the trees broke open into a clearing where the moon lit everything in pale silver, and we collapsed against each other, trembling, but too afraid to cry, too afraid to breathe aloud. That's when we realized the silence wasn't right. Not the silence of safety, but of something waiting, and slowly, as if the night itself was bending forward to listen, we heard our own voices again, mine, Mark's, Tom's, and even Kyle's, all overlapping, all whispering from the tree line, pleading and mocking in the same breath, urging us back into the forest like a chorus of the damned. And the worst part, the part that still makes my skin crawl as I speak this aloud to you now, was the sound of my own voice, clearer than the rest, calling Mark by name with such perfect mimicry that even I almost answered. So if you ever hear yourself out there in the dark whispering back to you, for the love of everything you believe in, don't reply. I was driving home past midnight. The highway stretched empty in both directions, and the fog rolled so thick it felt like driving through wet cotton, my headlights useless beyond 20 feet. Every few seconds I'd catch the flicker of shapes that weren't really there, like ghosts dissolving just before recognition, and I remember the radio had gone to static, which only amplified the silence pressing in, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the world has forgotten you exist. I had been on this road 100 times before, but that night it felt alien, wrong. The asphalt slick with mist and glistening like oil under the beams. When I saw it, at first I thought it was a deer, slender, standing in the middle of the lane just ahead, its body pale against the murk. I slowed quick, heart thudding in my throat, but then the shape moved, and I swear it straightened itself upright, too tall, too deliberate, and as I crept forward the fog peeled back just enough for me to see it clearly. Its arms hung almost to its knees, skin tight and greyish, as though it had been stretched over bone too thin to hold it. Its chest hollowed like starvation had chewed through it for decades, yet it was standing perfectly still like a sentinel with eyes that burned faintly red. Not bright, not animal, but ember like dying coals, the kind that glow in a fire long after the flames are gone. My first instinct was to swerve and gun it, but the bastard thing tilted its head slow, unnatural, like a dog imitating confusion. And when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out wasn't a growl or a scream, but my mother's voice whispering my name. I nearly pissed myself, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. I knew what it was. I had heard of legends from the North Woods, old stories about a creature born of famine and cannibalism, the Wendigo, and suddenly every tale I'd ever dismissed as backwoods folklore clawed to life in front of me. I floored it, swerving just enough to avoid hitting the thing, but as I passed I smelled it, a nauseating stench of rotting meat and iron, like raw blood spilled across rusting steel. It was so strong it gagged me, and for a split second in the mirror I saw its face twisted toward my car, skin torn at the lips, exposing teeth jagged and yellow like old tombstones, saliva thick and stringing from its jaw, eyes following with an intelligence that froze my spine. That wasn't an animal. It knew me. I kept driving faster than I should have. tires hissing on the wet pavement, heart pounding loud enough I thought it would drown out every other sound. But then I heard it again, not outside, but inside the car. The sound of breathing, wet, labored, like something with fluid in its lungs, exhaling inches behind my seat. My throat went dry and I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror because some primal part of me knew if I saw it back there, I'd lose my fucking mind. I just kept whispering to myself, it's not real. It's not real, like some pathetic prayer hoping my words could rewrite reality. But then the voice spoke again, clear as day. A perfect imitation of my own voice, but twisted slightly, like hearing a recording slowed down, just saying one word. Hungry. I slammed the brakes, swerving nearly off the road, shaking so bad, my teeth clattered. But when I finally snapped my head around, the back seat was empty. Just coats and a pack of water bottles rolling from the stop. The fog outside pressed against the windows like living skin, and I realized if I stayed still, I'd go insane. So I hit the gas again, pushing the car past 90, eyes locked straight ahead, the road cutting like a black scar through the suffocating grey. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was seconds, I couldn't tell. Time collapsed when terror owned me, and just when I thought I had outrun it, the fog ahead rippled and outstepped another figure, or maybe the same one, bones cracking as it moved, limbs twitching like a marionette held by clumsy hands, and I swear this one smiled a wide, inhuman grin as I barreled toward it. I shut my eyes, preparing for the impact, but there was nothing, just the sick realization that the highway was empty again, my car still screaming down the slick asphalt, my body drenched in sweat and piss and shaking so bad I could barely keep my hands on the wheel. By the time I reached the next town, the fog had lifted, and the night was calm and ordinary, like nothing had happened. But I know better. I can still smell that rancid stench in my nose. No matter how hard I scrub, I can still hear that voice in my head, saying hungry. And every time I drive alone at night, and the fog begins to creep in, I catch myself staring too long into the mirrors, waiting for something that wears my voice to answer back. So if you're ever out there and the mist thickens around you, if you hear your own name whispered from the dark, do not trust it, because the hunger never ends. I woke just before dawn, the way I always do ever since Vietnam, my body trained to snap awake when the air feels wrong. And that morning, the stillness outside wasn't the quiet of peace, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest like a weight. My ranch has been in my family 40 years, and I know every smell, every sound, every shadow across the pasture. But when I stepped out onto the porch, the air reeked like spoiled copper and wet fur. The kind of stench you never forget from battlefields where bodies festered in the heat and drew flies thick as smoke. I grabbed my rifle out of habit and trudged through the damp grass, my prosthetic leg squeaking faintly with each step. There's no dignity in the click of metal against dirt, but you learn to live with it. You learn to fight through discomfort and pain, or you fucking die. And when I reached the far edge of the field, I saw her, my best cow, split open like someone had butchered her, but not with any blade, I know. The ribs spread wide and cracked, organs missing, head twisted clean around as if a giant had wrung it like a wet rag. For a moment I thought maybe coyotes had gone rabid or a bear had wandered further south than usual, but the precision of it stopped me cold, not eating, not even tearing for meat, but something deliberate, like someone had reached inside with both hands and pulled her apart just to see how she worked. My heart was hammering in my chest the way it had the night the jungle lit up with tracers and screaming men back in '68. and the stink of death clung so strong it coated my tongue like rancid grease. Then I noticed tracks in the mud around the carcass, elongated prints too narrow for a man, and too damn long for anything I've ever seen, clawed impressions deep as knives, and spaced as if something with legs taller than me had been pacing in slow circles. I whispered a prayer without even meaning to, and I felt the hairs on my arms bristle when the wind shifted and carried with it a low groan from the tree line. Not the groan of pain, but of hunger dragging itself across vocal cords too brittle to be human. I've heard every fucking noise men can make when their guts are spilling out, and this was worse. This was something old and starving and patient. I chambered around though my hands were trembling, and I hate to admit it, but my bowels loosened like I was 20 again, with artillery raining down, and for a second I thought I'd collapse in the mud. Next to the cow, the fog started creeping low across the pasture as the sun bled through in strips of pale orange, and I caught sight of something moving between the trees. Tall, barely more than a silhouette, but wrong in proportion, its limbs far too long, its torso narrow as a beam, yet hunched forward like hunger itself had bent it into a grotesque shape. The fucker was watching me, its eyes glowing faintly like coals hidden deep in ash, and when it tilted its head, I heard my own voice call out from the trees like an echo, asking me to come closer. My prosthetic leg felt heavier than it ever had, and each step backward was like dragging a corpse behind me. But I couldn't run, not on this uneven earth. So I stood frozen, aiming into the shifting fog, praying to Christ the rifle would be enough, and then it moved forward, slow, deliberate, as if savoring my fear, its mouth opening wide enough that its jaw cracked like wood splitting, and inside were teeth like shattered glass. Dozens of them packed into a grin that promised dismemberment, and it whispered again. But this time in the voice of my old sergeant, the man who bled out in my arms 40 years ago, telling me it was all right to let go. I nearly dropped the gun, my stomach turning and my skin slick with cold sweat, because no one knew those words but me. Still I fired, 3 shots cracking through the fog, each one slamming into its frame, and the recoil jolting my bad leg so hard it buckled, but the thing did not fall. It staggered back and released a scream. That wasn't a scream, but the sound of every animal dying at once, an orchestra of suffering that shattered the quiet morning birds into silence. I turned and limped as fast as I could, back toward the house, every step feeling like the last one before I'd be torn apart, my prosthetic slamming the dirt, my lungs seizing for air. When I reached the porch, I spun around ready for it to come charging, but the pasture was empty, only fog curling low over the carcass of the cow, and the echo of my own voice whispering my name faintly through the mist, as if it hadn't gone anywhere at all, but had learned me, studied me, claimed me for later. And now every night since then, I wake to that same copper stench seeping through the cracks of my windows and the whisper of my mother's voice calling from the darkness outside, telling me to open the door. And I know the moment I do it, we'll finally step inside. We thought a day hike would be simple, a chance to clear our heads and get away from the suffocating static of city life, but the woods have a way of swallowing confidence and spitting it out as dread, and by late afternoon I realized the trail markers were gone, and the trees all looked the same, as if the forest had quietly rearranged itself around us. I tried not to panic, because panic is like gasoline to fear, but the air had grown thicker, colder, and every shadow stretched too long, as if the sun was sliding away faster than it should have. Emily clutched my arm, whispering that she thought we had passed the same bent pine twice, and though I wanted to argue, I knew she was right, because even the scrape marks on the bark were identical, By the time the sun dipped low, the silence pressed heavy. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the dead weight of stillness wrapping around us like a noose. And then the smell hit, a rancid amalgamation of iron and decay and wet fur that dragged me straight back to a childhood memory of stumbling on a roadkill deer in July, left to rot and swell with maggots, the scent that makes you taste metal in your throat and fight the urge to vomit. Emily gagged, pressing her sleeve to her face, and I pulled her closer because every instinct I had was screaming that we were no longer alone. I heard it before I saw it, a crunch of underbrush, not in rhythm with our steps, slow, deliberate, heavy, like something with weight dragging its limbs with calculated precision. We spun in circles, straining our eyes against the thinning light, and then it moved into view just beyond the tree line, taller than any man I've ever seen, its body skeletal yet elongated, with arms dangling nearly to the ground, skin stretched tight and grey like parchment pulled over bone, its chest sunken, its joints bulging grotesquely, its head jerking slightly like its neck was too weak to hold it up. But its eyes burned through the dusk, faint red embers flickering with an intelligence that froze me to the marrow. Emily squeezed my hand so hard her nails cut my skin. But neither of us could make a sound. The thing leaned forward, and when its mouth opened it was too wide, far beyond anything human, its jaw cracking like splintering wood, to reveal rows of teeth jagged and irregular like broken glass shoved into rotting gums. And then it spoke, not in its own voice but in mine, an imitation rough and distorted, yet recognizable enough to make my bowels clench. It called Emily's name using my tone, twisting it into something grotesque and hungry, and she whimpered like a wounded animal collapsing against me, tears spilling down her face. That sound seemed to please it, because it took a step forward, and I swear the earth groaned beneath its weight, though its frame looked impossibly frail. Panic took over, and I dragged Emily by the arm, stumbling backward through the underbrush, thorns ripping at our legs, branches slapping our faces. But the thing followed, its long fingers scraping against tree trunks with a sound like claws carving stone, its pace unhurried, as though it knew exhaustion would finish us before it needed to lift a hand. Emily tripped and went down screaming, her ankle twisting at an angle that made me gag. But I hauled her up, forcing her to limp with me every step, punctuated by her sobbing gasps, and that fucking smell saturating the air thicker and thicker until I thought I'd choke on it. We broke into a clearing where the last smear of sunlight painted the ground blood red, and for a heartbeat I felt relief. But then the creature stepped into the light, and its skin looked translucent, stretched so thin I could see dark veins crawling beneath it, its ribs pushing out like prison bars over a hollow stomach that growled audibly as though emptiness itself had found a body. Its eyes locked onto mine, and for a sickening moment I felt recognition, like it knew me, like it had always known me, and had simply been waiting for me to wander far enough from safety. Emily sobbed, begging me to help her, but my legs had turned to stone, and all I could do was watch as it tilted its head back and released a sound that was not one sound but many voices all at once. Children crying, women shrieking, men begging for mercy, all twisted together into a single wail that shook the marrow in my bones. The forest around us seemed to recoil, even the trees trembling in the dying light. And then it whispered again, this time in Emily's exact voice, pleading with me to let her go. Something inside me snapped, and I dragged her forward through the clearing, even though her ankle buckled beneath her, even though she screamed with each step, because I knew if we stayed it would devour us both. Behind us came the snapping of limbs, as if entire trees were being bent aside, and the ground shuddered under each of its strides, and through it all, that voice followed not one voice, but a chorus, echoing both of us, calling in unison as we kept going, never looking back. Never look back. We were just three dumb high school kids with nothing better to do over summer break than ride our busted bikes down cracked roads that cut through the old farmland on the edge of town, headed toward the fishing spot everyone swore was haunted, even though we pretended we didn't believe in that shit. The sun was hot, the kind of heat that makes sweat bead in your eyes, and the smell of cut hay clung to the air as we pedaled past fields that looked abandoned weeds, tall and wild, spilling through rusted barbed wire fences and collapsing barns leaning like drunks. I remember thinking the place felt dead, not just old but forgotten, like time had let it rot in silence. But we didn't care, because we were boys with rods and a cooler full of warm beer we stole from my dad's garage. We cut down the dirt path to the creek, tossing insults at each other, the way teenage assholes do, until we reached the bank, where the water moved sluggish and green with algae buzzing with gnats. We spread out along the edge, throwing lines and arguing about who would catch first. The smell of the water was sour like fish left in the sun, and the only sounds were our voices and the occasional splash. Then the air shifted. It wasn't the kind of breeze you welcome in the heat. It was cold, sudden, and carrying a stink that made my stomach clench, a rancid mixture of rusted metal and rotting meat, like a slaughterhouse left to decay under the sun. We all noticed it at once, but no one said a word, because admitting fear when you're 17 is suicide for your pride. Then Bobby's line went taut, but instead of a fish, he yanked up half a deer skull, waterlogged and slimy, with strips of hair still clinging to it, the sockets hollow and staring at us with a grotesque emptiness, and he cursed, throwing it aside. But none of us laughed, because the silence in the trees had grown absolute. Not a bird, not a cicada, not even the whisper of wind, just dead stillness pressing so heavy it felt like the earth was holding its breath. I turned my head toward the far side of the creek and froze, because standing there beyond the brush was something that should not fucking exist. It was tall, gaunt, its limbs elongated past any human proportion, and its skin clung to its bones like parchment, stretched over a skeleton starved beyond recognition. Its ribs jutted sharp under a hollow chest. Its head bent low, as if the weight of hunger itself forced it down, and its eyes glowed faintly like embers buried under ash. For a second I thought maybe I was hallucinating, the way the heat sometimes makes things shimmer, but then it moved, stepping forward, slow, deliberate, and my gut turned to ice. Kevin muttered "holy shit" under his breath, and I glanced at him, only to see his shorts darken as piss streamed down his leg, pooling into the dirt, and he didn't even care, didn't even try to hide it, because we all knew we were looking at something that could unmake us in seconds. The thing tilted its head, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was wrong. It was a voice, but not its own. It was Bobby's voice calling my name, except stretched, broken, guttural, like someone who had learned language by chewing on the syllables and spitting them back raw. My chest seized with panic. I told them we had to go now, but my voice cracked so bad it sounded more like a whimper than an order. None of us moved for what felt like hours, but must have been seconds, and then the thing crouched, its long fingers scraping the soil like claws, dragging stone, and it smiled its teeth, long, jagged, uneven like shards of glass crammed into bleeding gums. I grabbed my bike, screaming at the others, and we took off back up the dirt path, our wheels spitting gravel, our lungs burning as though the air itself had turned poisonous. Behind us came the sound of trees cracking under impossible weight, and that voice again. Only now it was all three of our voices overlapping, laughing, sobbing, pleading in distorted chorus, following close enough that I could feel the vibrations in my chest. Kevin was crying openly. Bobby was gagging on bile, and I was screaming at them to keep pedaling. but my thighs were on fire, and my prosthetic chain skipped on the gears, nearly pitching me sideways into the weeds. When we finally hit the main road, we didn't stop, we didn't breathe, we just kept going until the houses reappeared on the horizon. And even then we didn't speak. When I looked back, there was nothing behind us, no sound, no movement, no smell, just the long stretch of farmland silent under the sun, like it had swallowed the entire event whole. That night I lay in bed, replaying it over and over, convinced I'd imagined it, until I heard the crunch of gravel outside my window and a voice from the dark whispering my name in perfect mimicry of my own voice. And if you ever hear yourself calling you from the night, for the love of God, do not answer. We thought camping would be a romantic escape, a weekend to vanish from the fluorescent prison of our jobs and the suffocating monotony of routine. Just 3 of us, tangled together in the woods, a throuple that everyone else whispered about, like we were some strange experiment. But to us it felt right. It felt real. And it felt like freedom. So we packed the tent, the cooler, the whiskey, and drove out, past the lights of town, until the road gave way to dirt, and the trees rose thick and endless around us, shutting out the horizon and promising privacy when we arrived. The sun was low, bleeding orange across the lake. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and the insects hummed their ancient dirge. We set up camp, drank, laughed, touched each other with the reckless abandon of people who wanted to believe the world was theirs that night. The fire cracked and hissed shadows jittering across our skin, and with the liquor in our bloodlines and the stars overhead, we got carried away, the 3 of us naked in the tent, sweaty, gasping, pulling each other apart and back together until we collapsed in a pile of breath and flesh and whispered affection. I remember drifting into sleep, my chest against hers, his arm heavy across my ribs, all of us lulled by the lullaby of cicadas and distant water. But then a sound cut through the haze. It was subtle at first, like branches cracking underfoot, but deliberate, not the skitter of a raccoon or the loping of a deer. Something heavier, slower, calculated. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the glow of the fire, still alive outside, but it had gone cold. The tent was dark. The only light came from a sickle of moon, and that sound again, closer, deliberate. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some animal. But then came the smell. It crawled under the flap of the tent, a stench so foul I gagged, a stench of iron and rot, like a corpse pulled from a bog. After weeks of decay, I whispered to them to wake up, my voice shaking, and when they stirred, confused and bleary, that smell hit them too. One of them covered her mouth, dry heaving, while the other grabbed for the flashlight, but when it flicked on, it only revealed the inside of the tent. Pale faces, wide eyes, sweat beading, but outside the sound persisted. Branches, cracking soil, crunching breath, dragging like a lung filled with liquid. I held my breath listening. Then came the voice, low, guttural, rasping, but impossibly familiar. It was her voice calling my name. Exactly her voice only. She was next to me, trembling. That is when my blood froze. I told them not to move. Not to fucking move, but one of them whispered back. Maybe it's a lost hiker. Maybe someone's out there in trouble and against everything in me. I wanted to believe it too. So I crawled forward, unzipped the tent, just enough to peer out the flashlight beam, slicing into the dark. And I swear to you, I wished I had never looked, because across the clearing, just beyond the dead fire, stood something wrong. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs spindly, elongated fingers almost scraping the ground. Its skin grey, stretched so thin I could see bones jutting underneath its head, hung forward. But its eyes caught the light glowing, like embers buried in ash. And when it opened its mouth, the sound that spilled out was all of us. Our voices tangled together, moaning, sobbing, pleading, laughing all at once. My skin crawled with pure animal terror, and I yanked the zipper shut, whispering to them what I had seen, their faces twisted in disbelief, until the thing circled the tent and dragged its claws along the nylon, the sound like knives across canvas, the tent shaking with every scrape one of them screamed. I clamped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late, because the creature stopped, and for a second the silence was worse than the sound. Then the flap pulled taut, as if pinched between invisible fingers. I shoved them back, grabbing the hatchet we had left near the bags, my hands slick with sweat, my legs jelly. But when I tore the flap open to swing, nothing was there. Only the stink, only the silence, only the trees looming. I spun in every direction but saw no trace, until I heard it behind me. Breathing inches from my neck, I spun again, the flashlight trembling, and caught a glimpse of its face too close to mine, its mouth gaping wide enough to split its skull teeth, jagged, broken, slick with gore, its breath hot and rancid, filling me with nausea. I swung the hatchet, screaming, but it moved with a speed that mocked physics, melting into the shadows, and reappearing by the tent where they were huddled together, its hand rising, long fingers curling toward them. I charged forward, adrenaline tearing me apart from the inside, but when I blinked, it was gone again, leaving only that voice behind the voice of the one I love, whispering from the tree line, begging me to follow. And if you ever find yourself in the woods at night, and you hear someone you love calling for you, when you know damn well they are already beside you, do not fucking answer. The call came in just after midnight, a storm so thick it swallowed the whole goddamn county, and when dispatch told me I had to get out there, clear the state route for emergency access, I already knew it was going to be one of those nights where the wind claws through steel and the cold chews the marrow out of your bones, but the overtime was too good to pass up, so I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on 3 layers, and stomped into the cab of the plough, the engine growling to life with that deep, throaty vibration that rattles your chest. The windshield wipers beating frantic against the onslaught of snow as I crawled out of the yard and onto the road. It was just me, the machine, and the storm. A white void where even the high beams barely cut more than 10 feet into the blizzard. I pushed forward mile after mile, the blades screaming against asphalt, the radio hissing static with the occasional garbled voice, and somewhere along the 4th stretch near the tree line, something in my gut twisted because the snow looked wrong, not just drifted or sculpted by wind, but like it had been dragged, long gouges cutting across the road, thick trails like something had been pulled through, half frozen and bleeding. I slowed the truck, my stomach clenching, and told myself it was a deer. Maybe some poor bastard had clipped one earlier, but the way those streaks swerved back into the woods sent a chill deeper than the air ever could. I radioed it in, got nothing but static, not unusual in storms like this, but enough to make me feel like I was the last living thing in the world I kept ploughing, trying to ignore it. But a few miles further along the smell hit me, and it came through even in that sealed cab. The heaters blasting it was the stink of rot and copper. So heavy I gagged, yanking the collar of my coat over my mouth, but it seeped through my pores. The kind of smell that sticks to your tongue like rust when I looked up there. It was in the glow of my lights, standing dead center in the road. At first, my brain insisted. It was a moose antlers, black and crooked, jutting upward, its body towering gaunt, But then it turned its head, and every instinct in me screamed wrong. Its face wasn't a face, not anymore. The skin torn tight across bones like paper. Over sticks, its eyes hollow pits glowing faintly red, and its mouth gaping wide with teeth, too many teeth, broken and jagged and wet with whatever it had last been feeding on, my whole body locked. I could not breathe, could not think, just watched as it lifted one hand impossibly long, fingers knotted like branches tipped with claws that scraped the asphalt. The thing leaned forward, jerking like a marionette, and the sound it made was what truly undid me, because it was my wife's voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the storm, calling my name soft like she does. When she wants me to come back to bed, my heart dropped into my gut because she was home 40 miles away. Yet here it was beckoning me with her voice. I slammed the truck into reverse tires, spinning engine roaring, but it moved with me stepping closer, each lurch rattling the whole cab. I threw it back into drive and floored it, the blade clipping its legs with a sickening crack, like splitting frozen wood. But instead of going down, it clung to the front of the plough, shrieking in a chorus of voices. Not just hers, but dozens layered together. Men, women, children crying, laughing, screaming. And the windshield rattled like it would burst. I swerved, nearly jackknifed the whole rig, until finally it peeled off, slamming into the snowbank and vanishing in a blur of shadow and storm. I did not stop. I kept that truck screaming down the road, clearing a path that no one was crazy enough to use, praying to make it back to the yard. But when I finally rolled in, shaking, sweating, frozen to the bone, the foreman came out cussing, asking what the hell had happened to the blade, because it was bent, twisted steel, like something had chewed through it. From the outside, I could not answer. I just stared at him and muttered about the storm. He shook his head, told me to go home, get some rest. And maybe that is what I should have done. But when I climbed back into my pickup, parked in the far corner of the lot, I saw something that froze me. Where I stood tucked into the slush under the driver's side door were tracks, long, spindly impressions with claws dug deep into the ice, as if something had followed me back. And as I sit here telling you this, I keep thinking about the voice, how it called to me, how it knew me, and I cannot shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it is not out there in the woods anymore. It is closer, waiting for me to answer. And if you ever hear someone you love calling for you out in the dark when you know they should not be there for the love of God, do not fucking answer. The call came in just after 2 a.m, my phone buzzing on the nightstand like an insect trapped in a jar, and when I answered with that dry gravel voice you get when sleep is ripped from your throat, it was old Mrs. Halpern on the line whispering about how something was tearing through her garden. She said it with this odd calmness, like she was telling me the weather was unseasonable, but I could hear the quiver underneath. And when I asked if it was deer, she hesitated just a half-beat too long before saying, maybe, or maybe a moose. Her words muddled and uncertain. I sighed, pulled on my uniform pants over the thermal underwear I slept in, slipped into the cruiser and drove down through Main Street, the town swallowed by darkness, the kind of stillness that makes every street lamp hum feel like a scream. When I turned off onto her dirt road, the snow crunched under the tires loud enough I had to lower the radio, though it was nothing but static anyway. Her place was one of those old farmhouses with peeling paint and an acre of overgrown yard, where the wind moved through the dead stalks like whispers. She was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, her hair wild around her head, and she waved me down. Eyes wide, I killed. The engine stepped out, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, coppery metallic, like when you slice your hand open and suck at the wound, but heavier, like rot mixed with blood. She shuffled down the steps, pointing toward the side yard, whispering it was still out there. So I followed her finger, and sure enough, the snow was churned up, like something had been rooting through it. The fence posts cracked in places, and the ground slick with patches of dark that my flashlight revealed was blood. Thick globs steaming in the cold air. I knelt, touched my gloved fingers to it, still warm, which was wrong, because whatever had bled here had done so just minutes before. I told her to get inside, lock at the doors, and stay away from the windows. She scuttled off, clutching that quilt. Like armor, I unholstered my sidearm, flicked off the safety, and moved around the house, each breath fogging in front of me, each step sinking deep in the snow, when I heard it, a crunching wet sound like bones snapping between teeth. It came from the garden itself, where the rows of half-frozen vegetables were torn apart. I raised the flashlight beam and froze, because crouched there was not a deer, not any goddamn moose. What I saw was a thing that wore the ruin of an animal like a costume. Its limbs too long, its body-gaunt skin stretched thin and pale over bones like parchment clinging to a skeleton. Its antlers twisted, gnarled, blackened tips scraping against the branches above its face, or what was left of a face turned toward me, and I swear to Christ it smiled, its jaw cracking, wider than anything human, its teeth broken, jagged, and wet with gore. My heart lurched against my ribs, and my instinct screamed to unload the pistol. But I could not, my finger stiff against the trigger. The thing tilted its head, and then it spoke in her voice in that frail, wavering tone of Mrs. Halpin, saying, "Sheriff, is that you help me, please?" And that is when my whole body went cold, because she was inside, locked away as far as I knew. Yet here this thing was mimicking her with a perfect cadence. I fired. Finally, the recoil snapping me back to reality muzzle. Flash bursting in the dark, but the bullets tore through it like paper. No blood. Just holes that closed slowly like the snow itself. Knitting back together, it rose up on two legs, taller than any man, its head scraping the bare branches of the apple tree, and it screamed a sound like wind ripping through a graveyard, shrieking so loud my ears rang. I stumbled back, slipped on the ice, the flashlight rolling away, and in the dark I could hear it moving toward me. Slow, deliberate crunch, crunch, crunch of clawed feet in the snow. I scrambled up, heart-pounding lungs searing, and ran to the cruiser, slamming the door. Just as it lunged, the whole vehicle rocking as claws screeched across metal. I jammed the keys, turned the ignition, the engine screaming alive, and I tore down that road faster than I ever thought possible. Snow spraying in every direction, the rear-view mirror catching glimpses of it loping after me, keeping pace even as I pushed 60, 70, its body jerking unnaturally but closing the distance. I radioed for backup static. Nothing but static, like the storm had swallowed the whole frequency. I made it to the station. Finally brakes screaming as I slid into the lot, bolted inside, slammed the lock, and just stood there, chest heaving, ears ringing, sweat freezing against my skin. But the silence was worse than the chase, worse than the sight of it, because when I crept toward the window, pulling the blinds just an inch, I saw nothing, only the snow settling soft and undisturbed. Yet in the quiet I could still hear her voice, not weak, not afraid, but whispering right against my ear, even though I was alone, saying my name over and over again.
If you enjoyed the journey and survived it, Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who sleeps too easily, and subscribe for more original horror stories delivered straight into your nightmares. And if you have a true tale or twisted idea you'd like me to bring to life, leave it in the comments below. I read them all. Some of my favorite stories come from minds just like yours. And so the final candle is burned out, but some stories never really end. They wait in the corners of your mind, and now so must you. You have heard the incantations of the demised, the shadows sworn to secrecy. But what slipped through, what followed you back into the light, if these stories stirred something inside you, if they made you hesitate before turning off the lights, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next time, we're going deeper. So rest while you can, because next time the story just might be about you.